trials had already ended. We can just end it then.
In his book, Mather explained how he felt spectral evidence was presumptive, and that it alone was not enough to warrant a conviction.
Robert Califf, a strong critic of Cotton Mather, stated in his own book, titled More Wonders of the Invisible World, that by confessing an accused would not be brought to trial, such in the case of Tituba and Dorcas. Good.
Increased Mather and other ministers sent a letter to the court. The return of several ministers consulted, urging the magistrates not to convict on spectral evidence alone. The court later ruled that spectral evidence was inadmissible, which caused a dramatic reduction in the rate of convictions and may have hastened the end of the trials.
A copy of this letter was printed in Increased Mather's cases of conscience published in 1693. The publication, a trial of witches related to the 1662 Berry Street Edmonds witch trial, which was used by the magistrates at Salem, when looking for precedent in following spectral evidence.
In allowing spectral evidence. You said following. God. So much. Since the jurist Sir Matthew Hale had permitted this evidence, supported by the eminent philosopher, physician, and author Thomas Brown, to be used in the Berry St. Edmunds witch trial, and the accusations against two Lowestoft women, the colonial magistrates also accepted its validity and their trials proceeded. Tests often given to the accusers were... Most people didn't know how to swim back then.
Yeah, they did.
Not a lot of people.
How do you think they bathed?
They didn't go into the deep end. They just sat in the shallow end.
Swimming test. As part of the infamous swimming test, accused witches were dragged to the nearest body of water, stripped to their undergarments and bound, and then tossed in to see if they would sink or float. Since the witches were believed to have spurned the sacrament of baptism, it was thought that the water would reject their body and prevent them from submerging. According to this logic, an innocent person would sink like a stone, but a witch would simply bob on the surface. The victim typically had a rope tied around their waist so they could be pulled from the water if they sank. But it wasn't unusual for accidental deaths to occur.
Accidental drowning.
Witch swimming derived from the trial by water, an ancient practice where suspected criminals and sorcerers were thrown into rushing rivers to allow a higher power to decide their fate. This custom was banned in many European countries in the Middle Ages, only to re-emerge in the 17th century as a witch experiment, and it persisted in some locales well into the 18th century. For example, in 1710, the swimmer's test was used as evidence against a Hungarian woman named Dorco Bada, who was later beaten and burned at the stake as a witch.
Prayer test. Medieval wisdom held that witches were incapable of speaking scripture aloud, so accused sorcerers were made to recite selections from the Bible, usually the Lord's Prayer, without making mistakes or omissions. Because people don't make mistakes when they read, ever. While it may have simply been a sign that the suspected witches were illiterate, oh no, really, or nervous, any errors were viewed as proof that the speaker was in league with the devil. This twisted test of public speaking ability was commonly used as hard evidence in witch trials. In 1712, it was applied in the case Jane Wenham, an accused witch who supposedly struggled to speak the words, "Forgive us our trespasses, and lead us not into temptation," during her interrogation. Still, even a successful prayer test didn't guarantee an acquittal. During the Salem witch trials, the accused sorcerer George Burroughs flawlessly recited the prayers from the gallows just before his execution. The performance was dismissed as a devil's trick and the hanging proceeded as planned. God. Son of a bitch.
Touch test. The touch test worked on the idea that victims of sorcery would have a special reaction to physical contact with their evildoer. In cases where a possessed person fell into spells or fits, the suspected witch would be brought into the room and asked to lay a hand on them. A non-reaction signaled innocence, and if the victim came out of their fit, it was seen as proof that the subject had placed them under a spell. Touch test played a famous part in the 1662 trial of Rose Callender and Amy Denny, two elderly English women charged with bewitching a pair of young girls. The children had been suffering from fits and that left their fists clenched so tightly that even a strong man could not pry their fingers apart. But every test showed they easily opened whenever Colander of Denny touched them. To ensure the reaction was genuine, judges had the children blindfolded and touched by other members of the court. The girls unclenched their fists anyway, which suggests that they were faking. But even this was not enough to prove the women's innocence. Colander and Denny were both later hanged as witches.
If there's no proof, what's the point in the damn tests? Seriously, people. What? Witch cakes. A bizarre form of counter magic, the witch cake was a supernatural dessert used to identify suspected evildoers. In cases of mysterious illness or possession, witch hunters would take a sample of the victim's urine. I don't like where this is going. Mix it with rye meal and ashes and bake it into a cake. This stomach-turning concoction was then fed to a dog. Okay, well, dogs will eat anything. The familiars or animal helpers of witches, in the hope that the beast would fall under its spell and reveal the name of the guilty sorcerer. During the hysteria that preceded the Salem witch trials... I need to answer this. Quick.
Alright, witch marks. Witch hunters often have their suspects stripped and publicly examined for signs of an unsettling blemish that witches were said to receive upon making their pact with Satan. The devil's mark could supposedly change shape and color and was believed to be numb and insensitive to pain. Prosecutors might also search for the witch's teat, an extra nipple allegedly used to suckle the witch's helper animals. In both cases, it was easy for even the most minor physical imperfections to be labeled as the work of the devil. Himself, moles, scars, birthmarks, sores, supernumerary nipples, and tattoos could all qualify to examiners. Rarely came up empty-handed. In the midst of the witchcraft, desperate villagers would sometimes even burn or cut off any offending marks on their bodies, only to have their wounds labeled as proof of covenant with
What's the point in the tests if no answer is a good answer?
I'm a witch, you see. I'm a witch.
See the burn mark on the back of my hand? That makes me a witch. Damn. Pricking and scratching tests. If witch hunters struggled to find obvious evidence of witches' marks on the suspect's body, they might resort to ghastly practice of pricking as a means of sussing it out. Witch hunting books and instructional pamphlets noted that the marks were insensitive to pain and couldn't bleed, so examiners used specially designed needles to repeatedly stab and prick at the accused person's flesh until they discovered a spot that produced the desired results. In England and Scotland, the torture was eventually performed by well-paid professional prickers, many of whom were actually con men who used dull needle points to identify fake witches' marks. Along with pricking, the unfortunate suspect might also be subjected to scratching by their supposed victims. This test was based on the notion that possessed people found relief by scratching the person responsible with their fingernails until they drew blood. If their symptoms improved after clawing at the accused's skin, it was seen as partial evidence of guilt. Again, what's the point of the God-blessed test if there's no good answer? Nothing. It didn't matter what it was would work for them. Like, no, you're still a witch. Hell.
Incantations, also known as charging. These tests involve forcing the accused witch to verbally order the devil to let the possessed victim come out of their fit. or trance. Other people would also utter the words to act as a control, and judges would then gauge whether the statements had any effect on the victim's condition. Charges were famously used in the 16th century witch trial of Alice Samuel and her husband and daughter, who were accused of bewitching the 5 girls from the wealthy Throckmorton family. During the proceedings, judges forced the Samuels to demand that the devil release the girls from their spell.
Really?
By stating, because I am a witch. As I am a witch, so I... goodness. So I charge the devil to let Mistress Throckmorton come out of her fit at this present
Moment.
When the possessed girls immediately recovered, the Samuels were found guilty and hanged as witches. Sorry, guys. She's...
Other evidence included the confessions of the accused, testimony by a confessed witch who identified others as witches, discovery of puppets, books of palmistry and horoscopes, or pots of ointments in the possession of the home of the accused, and observation of what were called witches' teats on the body of the accused. A witch's teat was said to be a mole or blemish somewhere on the body that was insensitive to touch. Discovery of such insensitive areas were considered de facto evidence of witchcraft.
Puppets were like
Bullshit.
dolls.
Bullshit.
Although the last trial was held in May 1693, public response to the events continued. In the decades following the trial, survivors and family members and their supporters sought to establish the innocence of the individuals who were convicted, and to gain compensation. In the following century, the descendants of these unjustly accused and condemned have sought to honor their memories.
Events in Salem and Danvers in 1992 were used to commemorate the trials. Are we going to be done with this by 5? Because it's already 4:19.
I don't know why it's still repeating itself down here. Let's see. In November 2001 years after the celebration of the 300th anniversary of the trials, the Massachusetts legislature passed an act exonerating all who had been convicted and naming each of the innocent. The trials have figured in American culture, had been explored in numerous works of art and literature and film.
Can I go for there?
Yeah.
It's hot in here.
Over here. I don't know what all the other stuff was.
So, start at the top. Danvers. Oh, I'm doing the highlighted now. Speakers at the ceremony in August included playwright Arthur Miller and Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel.
Which Arthur Miller's the one that wrote The Crucible.
Ah.
Danvers erected its own new memorial and reinterred bones in earth in the 1950s, assumed to be those of George Jacobs Sr. in a new resting place at the Rebecca Nurse Homestead.
In 1992, the Danvers Tercentennial Committee also persuaded the Massachusetts House of Representatives to issue a resolution honoring those who had died.
After extensive efforts by Paula Keene, a Salem schoolteacher, state representatives J. Michael Ruin and Paul Tyron, along with others, issued a bill whereby the names of all these not previously listed were to be added to their resolution. To this resolution.
When it was finally signed on October 31st, 2001 by Governor Jane Swift, more than 300 years later, all were finally proclaimed innocent.
On Halloween.
Thank God. I know, right?
In January 2016, the University of Virginia announced this project team had determined the execution site on the Gallows Hill of Salem, where 19 witches had been hanged in public.
Members of the Gallows Hill Project had worked with the city of Salem using old maps and documentation, as well as sophisticated GIS and ground-penetrating radar technology to survey the area of what became known as Parker's Ledge.
The city owns the property and plans to install a memorial there and to the innocent victims. A documentary, Gallows Hill 19, is in production about these events.
Can you breathe?
No.
The cause of the symptoms of those who claimed affliction continues to be a subject of interest. Various medical and psychological explanations for the observed symptoms have been explored by researchers, including psychological hysteria in response to Indian attacks, convulsive ergotism caused by eating rye bread made from grain infected by the fungus Claviceps purpurea, a natural substance from which LSD is derived, an epidemic of bird-borne encephalitis lethargica, and sleep paralysis to explain the nocturnal attacks alleged by some of the accusers.
Some modern historians are less inclined to focus on biological explanations, preferring to instead to explore motivations such as jealousy, spite, and a need for attention to explain the behaviors. I'm dying. That was a long one, sorry guys.
Really long.
But it's very informative.
Goodness gracious.
Sorry. Like us, share. I hope you guys have enjoyed Scareween so far.
This would be day 8.
Yeah, this is only day 8, so we've got a lot more to go. What do you think could have caused the people to accuse their neighbors?
I think they were all bonkers or jealous.
I think they were just jealous. Like, I think that they were, you know, like, they wanted the other people's land. And they wanted to, like, they were accusing people that they hated, so. That's what I think I was did. Anyways, like, subscribe, share. I made it to 41 so far. Subscribers. I got new subscribers. Thank you.
Happy day 8 of Scareween.
Thank you for subscribing. Day 8 of Scareween. Tomorrow we got the Queen Mary. We got some scary stories tomorrow. So, anyways.